All right, good evening, everyone. We are going to start this meeting. This is the Landmarks Committee meeting of Community Board 5. My name is Leila Logiziko, I'm the chair. A few words about how this meeting is going to proceed. We have one item tonight on the agenda. This is a request for evaluation. We are going to receive a presentation on this request. The way our meetings work, you're probably familiar with our format, but for those who are not, here's a little refresher. The applicant in this instance, it's more of a presenter, is going to give us a presentation. Following this presentation, we will turn to questions from members of the committee. Once this question period concludes, I will open up the floor to members of the public. Members of the public will have an opportunity to ask questions and make comments. Then once this period concludes, we will move to business session. During business session, only members of the committee are able to discuss the matter. Members of the public, as well as the applicants, are no longer able to speak unless recognized by the chair. Members of the committee will discuss the matter, and we will make a motion, which is basically our recommendation. This motion will be discussed and taken to a vote. The vote of this committee will then be presented to the full board of Community Board 5. The full board of CB5 meets Thursday next week. Please check our website for the exact date as well as the link to this meeting. The vote of tonight's committee will be presented, and then the full membership of Community Board 5 will vote on the motion that was adopted tonight. This vote by the full board becomes the official position of Community Board 5, and it will be forwarded to the relevant agencies as well as elected officials. In this case, obviously, the Landmarks Preservation Commission, as well as our city and state elected officials. So with all of that being said, I think we are ready to start the meeting. We have a quorum and I think almost full attendance. So thank you all for being here. The item tonight that we are going to review and discuss is a request for evaluation. It is for two buildings. The first building is the Puston Building located at 250 Park Avenue. And the second building is the Roosevelt Hotel at 45 East 45th Street. Both properties are in Midtown, and they're located in the I want to say the East Midtown subdistrict, but actually they may be in the Vanderbilt corridor. We will clarify that, but they are in East Mid. In generally speaking, the geographic area of East Midtown. Before we start the meeting, I thought it would be helpful to give a little bit of an explanation of what is a request for evaluation. So you know that the bulk of the work that we do is actually certificate of appropriateness, where we basically have applicants who come and tell us, they want to do some work, and we have to determine whether this work is appropriate for this particular building. And this is called a certificate of appropriateness. Tonight, we're reviewing something that is different. It is a request for evaluation. And the request for evaluation under LPC is basically a step that anyone can take, members of the public, civic organizations, property owners themselves. And this is what LPC has to say about this process. The agency, and that's LPC, conducts surveys to identify historic resources and potential landmarks. In addition, LPC reviews requests for evaluations. The acronym is RFE, from the public. To request an evaluation to determine whether a property meets the basic criteria for designation, please submit a request for evaluation form by email. Please note that if it is determined that a property may merit historic designation, it will be added to the agency's survey materials and considered in the context of agency priorities. And the designation criteria, so that everybody is aware, to become an individual landmark, a building must be at least 30 years old and have a special character or special historic or aesthetic interest or value as part of the development, heritage, or cultural characteristics of the city, state, or nation. So those are the criteria that LPC has identified and reviewed. And once again, the process for to file a request for evaluation is, as I just described it, it's very broadly open. Civic organizations, individuals, community boards can actually undertake this process. So in this particular instance, CB5 is not at the origin of this request. It has been the case in the past. We have actually filed requests for evaluations, but in this particular instance, it is a request that has been introduced by 4 civic organizations that are the 4 main historic preservation groups of New York City. And we are joined tonight by Françoise Bolac, who is with City Club, and who is going to, on behalf of those other groups, give us a presentation on the merits and why these 2 buildings fit the LPC criteria. Without any further delay, I'm going to turn it to Françoise for her presentation. Thank you, Françoise, for being with us.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for allowing us to present. I guess I'm going to try to share screen, and it works. Amazing. Okay.
Yes.
Yes, there we have it. How do I do it? Slideshow, play from start. So yes, thank you very much, and thank you to the Landmass Committee of CB5 for looking at this, and thank you, Leila, for a very clear introduction. It's good to remember what the criteria are. So my name is Françoise Bolac, and I am the chair of the Preservation Committee of the City Club, and I'm here today, as Leila told you, representing the 4 major preservation organizations, non-profit preservation organizations in the city of New York: the MES, the City Club of New York, the New York Landmarks Conservancy, and the Historic Districts Council. Now, we formed this alliance because these 4 organizations, which represent thousands of members dedicated to preservation in New York City, form this alliance because we feel that the 2 buildings I'm going to show you tonight are really important to the history of New York, to the history of the development, the layered development in Midtown, and they are extremely important to our understanding of Grand Central Station, and they're important as a context for the Grand Central Terminal. So this is roughly the sort of argument, and these 2 buildings are at risk. And they've been made at risk mostly by East Midtown rezoning. And the most at risk of these 2 buildings is the Roosevelt Hotel, which I'm going to talk about in a second. It's empty and it's not used. There's only just a couple of shops that are in use at the ground floor. These 2 buildings were part of what was called Terminal City, the early 20th century private development atop the Grand Central Station rail yards. The structures immediately around Grand Central Terminal were developed shortly after the terminal's opening, while the structures along Park Avenue further north were developed slightly later, around the 20s and 30s. Terminal City, as originally conceived, was a masonry city, as you see in the postcard on the left. And let me just, I can see you. And the photograph on the right, so you have this jewel of a public building in the middle, and then you have these private buildings all around it that form a sort of context for it. They're all masonry, they're all designed in a classical style. And this whole ensemble is really designed around the ideas of the City Beautiful, which is this idea of an ensemble, this idea of a municipal ensemble, in which generally a view is centered on a major public building. the 42nd Street Library, Grand Central Terminal, a major public building for which the buildings surrounding it form a sort of accompaniment, kind of a court to this kind of royal figure, so to speak. And so this is Terminal City, and our argument is that our understanding of Grand Central Terminal and the whole system that Grand Central Terminal formed is really dependent on us retaining some of those buildings around it. We've lost a lot of those buildings already. And so we think it's extremely important to retain the few that remain and to designate it so that we can manage their future. It's not that they're not going to change, but we need to manage their future. The consistency of architectural style was very important to this whole ensemble, and I think we'll see a little bit more of that later. So this is a view in 1913 of Grand Central Terminal and the viaduct that leads to it, and then the buildings surrounding it, all having a sort of a similar order of like 3 or 4 story base, a sort of rather undifferentiated middle, and a sort of 2 or 3 story loggia at the top, and a very just generous cornice in general. Masonry, brick, and limestone, terracotta, all of that is preeminent in the formation of this district. How do I go next? So the 2 buildings here that we're talking about are the Hotel Roosevelt, which is in the lower part, 45th Street, and the Puston Building. The Hotel Roosevelt is a whole block. It faces on Madison Avenue, and the Puston Building faces on Park Avenue. First, to start with the Hotel Roosevelt, it's the thing that's extraordinary about this building is that it retains almost practically all of its original features. The degree of integrity to this building is extraordinary. Up to the flagpoles, if you see on the picture on the left, the flagpoles remain as they do remain on the right. The cornice remains, it's intact. And the interiors are also largely intact. So what you're looking at is a design by George B. Post and Son, 1924. And like most of the original buildings around in Terminal City, you can see it's designed in a classical idiom. It has this very sort of generous limestone trimmed base, and then rather abstract, simple middle with a transition floor with windows that have, elaborate tops, and then a 3-story sort of loggia-like top, topped by a very generous copper cornice. All these elements still exist, and that is, in our view, very important. It also has a significant social history. The Guy Lombardo orchestra was playing there, and many significant events have happened. This is all the other significant hotels that were part of Terminal City, the Biltmore, the Commodore, the Ritz-Carlton have all been demolished. This is one of the last ones. And so it's very important to preserve it. As I said earlier, it's empty now, and we feel it's really at risk and we need to do something about it. You see here the design of the building, design features of the building. It's a very fully developed architectural, classical vocabulary with rustications around the windows. You see this, a marquee which still exists. This transition floor here in the base to the top as the limestone emerges into the brick background. All of this is as designed. It still exists. It still has its old windows. So the amount of integrity that this building possesses is rare in a city that changes all the time, and I think it's precious. A lot of storefronts still are original. The interiors also possess a high degree of integrity. There were murals were commissioned by famous artists N.C. Wise and Arthur Crisp, and they still exist. You see here the main lobby in the center, a sort of plaque celebrating Theodore Roosevelt, for whom the hotel is named. And a lot of these fixtures are original and still exist. So both inside and outside, this hotel has retained a high degree of its original design. It also contains a number of technical innovations. Of course, Grand Central Terminal was, aside from the terminal building, it had this incredible system of corridors and connections with buildings that were part of Terminal City. And of course, this system is inspiration in New York City for Rockefeller Center. So this system of connections is highly significant. And the Roosevelt Hotel had a corridor connecting it directly, which I think is closed now, but still exists, connecting it directly to Grand Central Station. It also had an extremely innovative ventilation system, which is also a ventilation system that was used in the tunnel under the Hudson to link us to New Jersey. So this is a whole world of not only a classical building, but a classical building that actually has in itself a lot of innovation. It had a hospital. This is the hotel that had the first doctors. It had a dog run. But we feel one of its most significant aspects is really its contribution to a context for Grand Central Station. The next building we want to look at is the Puston Building. It's designed in 1923 by Cross and Cross architects, who were significant architects in New York City. They designed, among others, the Tiffany Building at 57 and Fifth Avenue, the great Federal Building in Lower Manhattan, this great Art Deco neoclassical building, and many apartment buildings which are extremely well designed. Here they designed the Puston Building, and it too is a masonry building with an architectural sort of limestone and terracotta trim base, a light colored brick body, and it rises to the top. It uses a really interesting device to recenter its design. This rather flat loggias here, and a rather more developed triple loggia at the top, which has more depth to it. This is a very important building in that it gives Grand Central Terminal and the central building the only remaining context of what was originally the Court of Honor as originally conceived by Reed and Stem. Reed and Stem envisioned this view, as you can look at it on the right picture, as focusing on the terminal and then eventually this building. And these buildings are supposed to form a Court of Honor, which you're going to see in a second. And I think this picture gives you a very good idea of how this is supposed to work, which is that these buildings are forming a frame, and this line of this facade leads into this quarter round of the wing of the New York Central Building. And so this all forms, so this is the New York Central Building is the center building, and it's extending its wings as a grand classical composition through the subsidiary buildings along Park Avenue. So this whole development, which was, as we all know, a private development, had a general idea, which was a grand civic idea centered on the City Beautiful movement, which had buildings were not just themselves isolated pieces of architecture. They played a role in a grand urban composition. And the only reminder we have here of this grand urban composition of this Court of Honor is the Puston Building. So we feel those two buildings are really critical. It's critical for us to protect them and to save them as a way to give context. And so you can evoke this idea of this urban composition. As you can see here, the building on the left has disappeared. So you have this sort of half of a thing, but you can still see, once you think about it, you can still see this in action in the city. So we think it's very important for this to be preserved. Now, again, this is a detail of the Puston Building. You can see these are terracotta columns. This is very, very finely detailed. The brick is a wonderful color. It's a very fine brick, very fine textured brick. These are terracotta columns, terracotta capitals. There's just enough of it and not too much. It's very, very well pitched. And the building was the object of a very thoughtful restoration by Cooper Extott, I think about 10 years ago. And it's in excellent shape. And it also, I forgot to mention, it was built with a roof garden on the roof. I don't know if it still exists, but that was the idea. So these buildings are important. A lot of these buildings have been demolished. And so we need to protect those that remain with us. Where we are with the Landmass Commission is that our 4 organizations have sent a request for evaluation to Landmass Commission in June. The commission responded that they had looked at these 2 buildings and that they found the Hotel Roosevelt meritorious. But essentially the leg was, we'll get to it when we get to it, that they had priorities. And we send them a follow-up letter saying, what other priority can you have other than protecting these buildings, in particular the Roosevelt Hotel, which is empty and is therefore at risk? And we haven't heard from them. So at least the good aspect of this is that they think that at least one of these 2 buildings is worthy of preservation. Now, what we're here to ask you is to help us put this over the top and really reinforce and support this request. So we hope that you will. So that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Françoise. Let's jump right into it. Members of the committee, do you have any questions, either for Françoise on the presentation itself, or to me on the process, or to Françoise on the process, whichever way you are interested to engage in that. I see that Richard, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
So, yeah, just a clarification. Am I right in believing that the pictures you showed of these 2 buildings that are roughly current pictures, are they in fact what the buildings look like today? Or have there been changes? Okay, that's all.
Yes, they are. Yes,
that's the whole question.
Yes, I mean, the Roosevelt Hotel, as I was saying, is just intact. It's amazing. I mean, it's just, and the Puston Building is in very good condition. The renovation / restoration that Cooper Extott did a few years ago, they eliminated a drop ceiling and exposed the original ceilings. I mean, they did a few modifications, but all of these were extremely thoughtful. So, yes, it looks like it looks in the picture.
Okay, and actually,
Françoise, if you could put the photo of one of the buildings, sure. Like one of the current images. Yeah, this one, for example. I think that would be good for context.
That's the Puston Building, and it's. I mean, this is not a picture that I took today, but it's current.
Okay, thank you.
I actually had another quick question. Yeah. When you said that the commission responded about the hotel, but not about the Puston Building, did they say anything to the effect that they don't think it's worth it, or they just did not comment on it?
They just They just didn't comment on it. They just didn't. They just commented, positively on the Roosevelt Hotel, but they just didn't comment on the other one.
Okay, thank you.
The door is still open. If I read your question correctly, the door is still open.
Okay, great. Thank you.
you.
You're welcome.
Next question, John, go ahead.
Yeah, this is actually for you, Layla. Um, uh, when we did the East Midtown zoning project review, can you just inform the committee what positions we took on these two buildings, if any?
Yes, sure. First, for clarification, the Roosevelt Hotel is actually in the Vanderbilt corridor, which is a sub-district within the Midtown Special District and adjacent to the East Midtown sub-district. It's complicated, I'm sorry. The Vanderbilt corridor was actually rezoned first, and the Vanderbilt corridor basically runs along the Vanderbilt Avenue. So it's this sliver that borders Grand Central to the west. West of Grand Central. In the broader context, so basically these two rezonings happened simultaneously / consecutively. It started with the Vanderbilt corridors. They wanted to do all at once. There was a lot of pushback. As you probably remember, in this first iteration, Community Board 5 was adamantly against the proposal that was deeply flawed for a number of reasons. So eventually we came to two rezonings, but in any case, as it pertains to the historic resources that were within those two districts, we basically tried to do a survey of all the historic resources and ask for designation of those resources as a condition to actually be able to support the rezoning. And what ended up happening, it was actually a huge point of contention. There was some concession from property owners and developers and other stakeholders who were favoring and really pushing for this rezoning, that a number of properties would be designated and others would not, but we would discuss their fate later. So to answer your very specific question, CB5 is already on record recommending designation of those two properties and has deemed those two properties as meritorious of the landmark status. So we are already, stating that these buildings are good historic buildings and that they should be protected. At the time of the negotiation, once again, it was a very broad negotiation on so many issues. We basically, it came down to prioritizing other properties while those two were left out, of the sort of like rescue mission, if you want, with the understanding that, we would revisit the matter when it would be appropriate. So here we are today. Okay. So that's the long response, specifically to your question, but bringing a little more context.
Okay, thank you. That's what I thought. Thank you.
Yeah. Chuck.
Thank you, Layla, and thank you, Francois, for being with us tonight. Layla, I have a couple of procedural questions. Are these two buildings referenced in the previous resolutions of the board? These two buildings specifically?
Yes.
And which are those landmark committee resolutions?
So at the time, CB5 had convened a East Midtown task force on which a number of members of the Landmarks Committee served. If memory serves me well, I think that Karen was on the task force, as well as one of our colleagues, David Golab, who is no longer on the board. So it basically we pulled the best and finest from each committee to create this task force, and each member would represent those specific areas: transportation, land use, parks and open space, historic resources.
I see. So if one went back to the East Midtown rezoning resolution, these buildings would be referenced in that
Yeah.
resolution?
Yeah.
Okay, and did the LPC at that time make a decision about the evaluation of these two buildings in particular?
So as I explained, basically, that there was a long list of historic resources, and we worked very closely at the time with, the four civic organizations that focus on historic preservation, on, determining what was this list. And we also worked with SHPO, which is, the state historic preservation agency. We put together this list. I think that, I don't want to speak out of, maybe don't quote me on that, but I think there was a total of maybe 20 or 22 buildings that we had identified. And in the end, maybe Françoise has the answer to that question, but I think LPC ended up designating 15 or 17. So, certain buildings didn't make the cut, which really, and LPC was very clear that, it's not by lack of merit. It's just that, we can only push so hard back on, the pressure of property owners who didn't want any historic designation to start off with.
The commission did designate several hotels and other buildings that were part of Grand Central Terminal, the Grand Central Terminal City era. They were designated at the time, and
Right.
they are protected. Is that right?
Yeah, those are along, you're correct. Those are, I think mostly on Lexington Avenue, but nothing on the east side of Grand Central is designated. No hotel on the east side is designated.
And thank you. And did the commission at the time indicate, other than a lack of resources, a reason why it was not designating them?
I haven't found that.
Okay, and I guess my other question is, does the commission have, well, I have a timing question. This application was filed with the commission in June. It's December now with our board. So I'm wondering, when did this come to our board, and what is our practice about requests for evaluation? Do we consider every request that comes from these organizations, or every request that comes from any entity for an evaluation? How do we just control our agenda in that regard?
So this actually came to us, Françoise, you reached out to us, 2 months ago?
Yeah, a couple of months ago, maybe 2.5 months ago or so, yes.
Yeah, there's a great deal of outreach that needs to happen. So we didn't want to rush in, scheduling a hearing until we were sure that we had reached out to the property owners and other stakeholders, the bid and other organizations that represent property owners. So that took a little bit of time. Wanted to make sure we're not rushing into, considering an item without proper outreach and due process. In terms of determination of, which requests for evaluation come to the committee, first of all, it's those who approach us. If we're not initiating those requests, there's no requirement for LPC to actually refer those to the community board. So it's really, these individuals or organizations that reach out to us directly, and the determination to put it on the agenda is the prerogative of the chair. So that would be me.
Okay, thank you. And Francois, question for you. Has anything about the buildings changed since they were reviewed by LPC previously?
Well, yes, the Roosevelt Hotel has changed hands. It's now owned by Pakistani Airlines, and it has become empty. It was the pictures of the interior of the hotel that I showed you in the presentation were taken in June, and the hotel is now closed and empty. So that has changed. So the building is now, the Roosevelt Hotel is now we feel very at risk. We don't know what's going to happen to it. It's empty and it doesn't look good. So the Puston Building is still occupied. The Puston Building is alive, but it doesn't mean that it's not going to change. But the major change is really the Roosevelt Hotel has been emptied, and the leases for the stores are not being renewed. Most of the stores are closed. A few are running out their leases, but it's just a few.
Okay, I have just one more question. Could you, Francois, I don't have your background and your expertise in this. Could you compare for me, please, the attributes of these two buildings with the ones that in fact were designated by the Landmarks Commission in 2013 in terms of what they bring to the process?
Oh God, I mean, there's the hotels on Lexington Avenue, in my mind's eye, a couple of them are very much like the Roosevelt. One of them is more arts and crafts, but they're all in this like 1920s New York City idiom, which is classical, a tall base, a brick body, something at the top, a loggia and a big cornice. So they're very, very similar in the level of design, the quality of design, the architectural language. They all have a slightly different hand because they're different architects, but they're by and large really, really similar. So if I understand the sort of the gist of your question, it's hard to imagine why one would designate some of them and not others, because they're very similar.
So is there a reason this is not a request for a district as opposed to picking off individual buildings?
Well, I like that.
Well, for the context, for those who are not part of the rezoning negotiations and discussions, it was very much, on the mind of a number of advocates, and it would have been, in terms of policy, it would have gone in the way of what this rezoning was trying to achieve. So it was an effort that failed for that reason. But certainly I think that all at the table recognize that there was great merits for the creation of a historic district, but that would have really gone in the way of what the rezoning's stated goals were at the time.
I don't have any more questions now. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Richard.
Thanks. I actually have a follow-up question to Charles's question, which was sort of I feel like the last issue related to that is, when, if at all, in the process of an application for landmarking a building, does the clock stop on the ability of the owner to make changes? Is that only after it's been designated? I know they may have money issues about making any changes, but yeah, is there any time we can say, no, this is being discussed now, you can't do anything until we decide?
Well, Leila, you probably have the answer. I think there used to be, and I don't know, and I think it has ignored sometimes. There used to be an agreement between the Landmass Commission and the building department that if a building was being considered,
Correct,
the building department would not approve a demolition permit. But I think, and I don't have a specific example, but I think there have been a couple of examples where that has been forgotten.
Oh, gotcha.
Well, so here's what happened. Basically, when the landmarks law came into effect, it was, at the time, LPC was very good at identifying historic resources, designating them, and then moving on. And then at some point, the process became a little more sluggish. There were some really clear cuts, like the Empire State Building. Yeah, sure, of course. The Chrysler, yeah, no brainer. But then, it became a little more sluggish. There was, push and advocacy for historic districts, for individual landmarks. And the LPC, the Landmarks Preservation Commission, with the change of administration would, also bring change in terms of policy on historic preservation. So a number of buildings were identified as meritorious, but their fate was not adjudicated. And they basically lingered in limbo. And this was, sort of like, well, limbo ends up being good because the property owner can still make some changes, can still, contemplate, doing alterations and, changing the purpose of his building. But the deal was that once this, consider being under review status would apply, the DOB pretty much for anything would basically have to check with LPC before they could issue a permit. So that gave this layer of protection that not only, like demolition, of course, would be, a big issue, and, the DOB could not just simply, sign off on a demo permit, but even, alterations, changing windows, doing, like facade alterations, trying to deface a building, which is something that we've seen a lot, unfortunately, especially in the area of Terminal City and other parts of CB5. So that could not happen once the building was, under consideration. And then what happened is that the LPC basically had, I think, like something like 500 properties or, areas, including Union Square, Union Square Park, Bergdorf Goodman, just to name a few that are in our district, that basically lingered like that for years, decades. Bergdorf Goodman, 30 years. And then when Mayor de Blasio was elected, his chair of LPC said, enough of this backlog, this is ridiculous. Let's clear the backlog. And, quite frankly, it hadn't been a problem for anyone. I think everybody was happy with this sort of like, wishy-washy limbo that, didn't really go full on. So it was not exactly a landmark, but, it afforded some level of protection. And they said, no more of that. Let's get rid of the backlog. And in order to get rid of the backlog, they said, well, we don't have the bandwidth to actually evaluate all these buildings. So they basically removed this layer of protection for the majority of the buildings. We were very fortunate, actually, that, thanks to CB5's advocacy, Bergdorf Goodman did become a landmark in its own right, which was the right thing to do. So, basically now, my understanding, maybe I'm incorrect and we don't have someone from LPC here, but my understanding is that we are rebuilding this backlog where basically LPC deems properties meritorious, does not make the determination right away because it does require a lot of research, and this research is time consuming, and LPC is the least staffed agency in the city of New York. So for all these reasons, it takes time, but they're basically building up the backlog yet again. So this system of, this layer of protection does apply, and that's the only, that's the best that we could wish actually for. I mean, it's not the best that we could wish, but it would be an acceptable step for these buildings, giving them this layer of protection until LPC has a chance to actually, do the research and decide that they are worthy of historic designation.
That's very interesting and helpful. I do have a second question. In terms of the two buildings, we saw some of the inside of the hotel. We didn't see any inside of the Puston Building. Am I right that when you designate a specific building, you can be designating the exterior only or the exterior and the interior? And if that's the case, what are you asking for in terms of the two different buildings?
Well, in terms of Puston Building, we're really looking at an exterior designation The Roosevelt Hotel is, at a minimum, we would like an exterior designation because it would protect the building. It would be good if we could get some interior designation, as we got on this hotel in Park Avenue, whose name escapes me at the minute. But because you can designate, as I'm sure Laila know, an interior if the interior is customarily open to the public, and certainly a hotel is that, and it has significant interior spaces. So it would be great to get parts of the interior designated, but I think the first line of defense is really to get the building, as an exterior designated. You know, I think there's a good argument to be made, and thank you for asking that question. There's a good argument to be made for the interior, as it is not only the sort of grand hotel interiors, there's a lot of social history to it that, you know, it's too long to get into, but it's also part of this whole interior system of Grand Central. So it's really part of, you know, you don't really want to eviscerate it. So if we could get both designated, I think it would be really great. If we could put that on the table, it would be great. But I think that the emergency right now is to designate the exterior.
Thank you.
And, you know, just an additional point, it is fairly typical when a request for evaluation is made that you basically throw everything so that LPC is aware. You know, you don't want to, you know, omit any information, even if in the end, you know, the goal is not, or, you know, that they don't succeed with an interior designation. This is something that you want to bring up, you know, to the attention of the commission so that they can make their determination.
Yes, you're right. And the hotel name that I was blanking on is the Waldorf Astoria. The Waldorf Astoria has some interior spaces which are designated.
Yeah, thank God. Suzanne, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And Leila, this may be a question to you, and thank you so much, Francois, with all that you're trying to do. But given the point, which I think is so interesting about this being a grand urban composition and its importance to not only New York City, but as we know, New York City being the center of the universe. And I know that time is of essence, but, and again, Leila, this is perhaps to you, but do we ever try in evaluation looking for a national register of historic places? Do we ever pursue this, or does anyone ever look towards a more national perspective in terms of preservation for, as you've identified this area, that which remains being such an important corridor? And it may be a silly question, I'm just curious.
Yeah, so as ironic as it may seem, a protection coming from the National Register or a designation with the state historic preservation agency, SHPO, does not afford much protection.
Okay.
So the only real protection for a historic building in New York City, or, you know, any historic, you know, structure, scenic landmark, or interior, is actually through LPC.
Okay.
And I believe, and, you know, Françoise, maybe you have this information, but I believe that those buildings are already on some other registers of, you know, historically significant structures.
I don't think they're on the National Register. I mean, if the owners of these buildings were smart, they would petition the National Register to be listed on the National Register, because they could then avail themselves of preservation funds that this would unlock for them, which is 20% of the hard and soft cost of the cost of the project. So, you know, there's major buildings in Brooklyn which were done this way, where the owner just restores the building and develops it as a, you know, develops an industrial building as a condo or whatever, and what makes the project possible is federal funds, the federal preservation funds. But as Leila correctly says, this will not protect the buildings from being demolished, unfortunately. So what will protect the buildings from being demolished is really the Landmass Commission, and what will allow us to manage change. You know, it's not that, you know, we want to preserve them in amber, but we want to manage the change to these buildings so that it's done in a way that protects their significance in terms of their importance to this whole area.
Thank you. Tony, I know that you had your hand up, but now it went down. Just want to make sure that.
No, Richard had touched on it. I was going to ask about the interior landmarking as well.
Okay. Okay. And I think, Mark, you had your hand up at some point, but it also went down.
Yep.
I don't want to put
Hi.
anyone on the spot, but.
Yep, we're all good. Thanks.
Okay, great. All right. Let me open up the floor to members of the public. Members of the public, you can use the raise hand function if you wish to speak. If you could actually indicate that you wish to speak from the get-go and not wait, so that I get a good sense of the number of members of the public who wish to speak, so we can manage this session efficiently. That would be wonderful. And the first person to speak is Dan Kaplan. You are going to be permitted to speak. Let's see. I think I can. Okay, you're permitted to speak, and you can unmute yourself.
Hi, Layla. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. And I don't know if you can see me, but
We can't, but we can definitely hear you.
Okay, great. Good evening and thank you. I'm here on behalf of the owners and managers of 250 Park Avenue, also known as the Puston Building. And I just wanted to say a couple of things, if I might. First, Steve Kingsley, who's with AEW Capital Management, who actually runs or manages the building for a pension fund, sent a letter to Tony. I just want to read into, or an email. I just want to read it to make sure everybody has heard it. And then I just want to say a few things in response to Francois's thoughtful presentation. So first off, is that okay, Layla, if I just read that?
Yes, of course. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much. So this is, hi, Tony. First, let me apologize for a delayed response, as it has been quite busy, and we're only just learning about this most recent request to landmark 250 Park Avenue, a building we manage on behalf of a pension fund. We appreciate your inviting us to the meeting on November 30th, and though I am unable to attend, I've asked our representatives, myself, Mitch Corby is here, and Travis Terry as well on this Zoom, to attend, to listen, and to answer questions if possible. I want to state clearly that we cannot see a reason why our building would merit landmarks consideration. The building is not especially unique, nor does it contain any special historic or aesthetic qualities that reflect, from what we understand, the definition of an individual landmark building in New York City. This is perhaps why the city determined in 2016 that the building was not a priority for landmarking during the East Midtown rezoning, but did recommend 12 other buildings in the district. Moreover, when discussing the site during the rezoning and after the LPC review, we had conversations with elected and government officials and community members about how our site is truly a poster child, quote unquote, in realizing the potential of East Midtown rezoning. Ultimately, in addition to the significant economic benefits, this site can enable improved transit access for Grand Central Station and a northern connection for travelers, and help improve the public realm in many ways, especially by opening up a better pedestrian connection between Park Avenue and Vanderbilt Avenue. This is a kingpin site. In fact, we have just initiated an effort to design some preliminary plans which would achieve all these goals. I hope this background is all helpful. We certainly do look forward to working with the community in the future. That said, I do just want to underscore that we cannot support any landmarking of our site. Thanks again for reaching out. Our team looks forward to seeing you next week. All the best. Stephen Kingsley, Vice President, AEW Capital Management. Again, I'm just going to shift gears. I want to thank Francois for a nice presentation. I also want to acknowledge the 4 organizations, the City Club, MAS, the Conservancy, and HDC. It's quite great that these efforts are made. I will say, yeah, we don't have a complete presentation here tonight on the merits of 250 or the Puston Building, but a few points I just want to raise from a landmarking and architectural point of view. You know, the questions of like, does it merit special, design, does it have a special design character? Does it have a special character? Does it really merit designation? And then just a few points. One, it's not really an exemplar of its type. It's a infill building. It's an office building. It's not. It's of which there are many that are still extant. It's not Cross and Cross, who's a very fine architect. It's not their best example of their work. It's not the Tiffany building that was referenced. It's not the Federal building that was referenced. It's not the GE building. This was a great architect. This was not their greatest work. It really is a bland design with low identity. A part of Terminal City, which I think is the central thesis here. And I would say a few things, and we'll have to think about it a little bit more. But the coherence of Terminal City, I think, that ship has sailed a long time ago, really in post World War II. And really, this building is really a fragment, and I have to dig into the history of the Corps d'Honneur, but my understanding was that was a block to the south and really not part of this area. Just also one should note, I mean, there were some questions about what the state of the building is and so forth. The base was really almost entirely replaced by the Extet renovation, and much of its historic character has been removed. A lot, there was some nice detailing that has all been, and windows and trim that has, and architectural sculpture has all been removed in that renovation. Also, the interior, we have just finished renovating the Extet lobby, so that's 2 steps away from its original. And I will tell you, it's a very, very difficult building as an office building. It has extraordinary low floor-to-floor heights. It wasn't innovative in its time, and it certainly hasn't stood the test of time from a use point of view. And finally, the pension fund and AEW have been excellent stewards of this site, and as was mentioned in the letter, really see it as taking care of the building now, but also going forward, keeping the option open of really realizing this critical site as a juncture between Vanderbilt and Park Avenue, and making a much more highly amenitized public realm, and a bigger public realm, and a connection to transit, and of course funds for transit. So that really is the summary of our really just initial thoughts and response. And again, I thank you for the time, and thank you for just this forum.
Thank you very much, Dan.
You're welcome.
Moving on to Jeffrey Kessler, you are permitted to talk, and you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. I just unmuted myself.
We can hear you.
You can't hear me. Can
yes,
you?
We can. No, we can. We can hear
good.
you. Yes, you're on.
Good. I'm the president. I'm Jeffrey Kressler. I'm the president of the City Club of New York, and I've been a longtime board member of the Historic Districts Council and the Preservation Committee of Municipal Art Society. And we are engaging in this process right now because this isn't a community-based designation. These are orphan buildings. They have an owner, they have a site, and they're part of the city, but there isn't a neighborhood that is going to advocate for them. So what we are doing as the City Club, together with our sister organizations, is putting this forward because we believe that the decision as to whether this building, these two buildings should live or die belongs at the Landmarks Commission. What happened several years ago with the East Midtown rezoning, which the City Club tried to improve as it went along, and I don't think that we had nearly as much improvement as we did, is that the end result is this, that no building in Terminal City in the East Midtown rezoning is either too big or too historic to be torn down and replaced by something bigger and bulkier and newer. That no building is safe. And the city that we assumed would always be there is, as we just heard from the owner, that this is at risk imminently. So we would like, when the zoning began, the Landmass Commission was under a lot of pressure not to designate. The Historic Districts Council, MAS, and the Conservancy each came up with a list of dozens of buildings worthy of designation. And out of the dozens that were proposed to the commission, they designated what, 12? And said, that's it. Meenakshi Srinivasan, the chair at the time, said, that's it, that's all you're getting. Well, you can't stop the process because the way we think of things always changes. So Francoise did a wonderful job making an argument as to how these fit in the city. And I just want you to understand that we are doing this because we believe that the process, if these buildings are going to be condemned to death, it shouldn't be a casual condemnation. They should actually say at the Landmarks Commission, no, we don't think so. But once we get to a public hearing, I can't see how they can come up with that decision. So thank you very much for entertaining our request for evaluation.
Thank you so much. The next person to speak is Alison Greenberg. Alison, you are permitted to speak and you can unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. Hi, I'm trying to let the audio work, but
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you.
So I just wanted to thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak on behalf of this application. I'm the president of the board of directors of the Historic Districts Council, and I'd like to just read some brief remarks. Some of these remarks really echo the RFEs, but I think it's worth emphasizing some points, so I will do so. The Historic Districts Council is the advocate for all of New York City's neighborhoods, historic neighborhoods. Our mission is to ensure the preservation of significant historic neighborhoods, buildings, and public spaces in New York City, uphold the integrity of the city's landmarks law, and further the preservation ethic. And we are asking this committee, and then ultimately the full board, to pass a resolution asking the Landmarks Preservation Commission to designate both buildings at issue tonight. Regarding the Puston Building, this is absolutely part of very unusual, unique, important part of New York City history, the Terminal City, which was also known as the Grand Central Zone, an early 20th century commercial and office development in Midtown Manhattan, developed atop the former Grand Central Station rail yard. I realize that the committee is familiar with this given your work on Midtown East, but I thought it's worth emphasizing because when the owner mentioned that there's nothing special here, well, there is something special here about the Puston Building, and the Puston Building, along with the other surviving buildings in this area. It is part of the City Beautiful movement. It does have beautiful details, and it was considered one of the finest examples of urban design for its era. And like many buildings at that time, it has a richly embellished facade. I understand there has been, and that was from the New York Times, a piece in 1985 by Sean Kennedy. I understand there were renovations in the mid-'80s, that the building was cleaned. I understand there were changes made. I believe that the original vaulted ceiling was revealed and restored. The owner didn't mention if that has been torn out and demolished, or if it has been covered. If it's still there, then it's worth saving. With respect to the Hotel Roosevelt, also a critical part of Terminal City, and it's one of the rare intact buildings remaining from that development that is associated with the construction of the current Grand Central Terminal. If the Grand Central Terminal area is not unique and special as to its buildings individually or together, then what in New York City is? I mean, how iconic is Grand Central Terminal to New York City? It's absolutely iconic and important to New York City's architecture and history of its transportation. I'm almost done, I'll wrap up, but it's also important to note that this hotel for 100 years was known for its popularity, refinement, and luxuriousness, and only with the recent pandemic impact on the economy has it closed, and now it is imperiled. But we're not seeking protection just to stop it from being demolished, torn apart, etc. We're seeking protection because it deserves protection. And so we're asking for you to consider it as part of its own aesthetics, but also its place in the history of Terminal City and as a lone survivor of Terminal City. Thank you so much for your consideration.
Thank you, Alison. Any other members of the public who wish to speak, to make comments or ask questions? Brad Vogel, you have your hand up. You're going to be permitted to speak and you can unmute yourself.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Brad Vogel and I am a member of the Preservation Committee of the City Club of New York. And I'm here today to speak in strong support of recommending designation for both the Roosevelt Hotel and the Puston Building. I wanted to give you an example, though, an anecdote as to why it is, in fact, important to retain remnants of Terminal City going on into the future. I used to work in an office building at 335 Madison for several years, and it was only after my third year working there and looking out the window and seeing the Roosevelt Hotel off through the back of the Yale Club that someone came in. We had a meeting in a conference room and the person said, "I don't know if I should be meeting here. This, you know, is the old bones of the Biltmore Hotel." The Biltmore was completely stripped, as you know, of all of its sort of exterior sense of self down to the girders before I was born. I had no idea that that had happened. And as we continue to lose more and more elements of what was Terminal City, I point this out only to say that if too many elements of it go, literally there will be nothing left to tell people that once there was a Terminal City and that it was an intentionally interconnected campus of sorts in an urban setting that really had meaning and was an entire ecosystem of the built environment surrounding Grand Central. So I think it is really important. The Roosevelt Hotel in particular was one that I think it is replete with special and unique elements. No one has mentioned thus far the sculptural busts in the keystones of the arches that are really a very intriguing part, as I know from walking by it and walking around it during coffee with friends between on coffee breaks. They're really an intriguing part of the streetscape in this area, and they are things that make people stop and look and feel as if they're in a particular place. The same goes with the interior of the Roosevelt Hotel. I have many strong memories there as well. And I just want to point out that the Roosevelt Hotel has the quality of being an anchor of a place that remains persistent through time. And I hope that you will encourage LPC not to let this building be demolished before it reaches its 100th birthday. But I'm going to close things out here with a short poem that I actually wrote that incorporates the Roosevelt Hotel during a snowstorm looking out from 335 Madison. It's called 44th Vanderbilt and Madison. Yale Club, Roosevelt Hotel. Flurries scale brick and glass gulches, whirling up, snowing from sidewalk to sky. I find it strangely comforting that they, too, get tossed about, pulled in zany trajectories by midtown midday mayhem. We snow globe brothers, frantically going, yet oddly calm, suckers for a wild ride. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brad. Any other comments or questions from members of the public? I see a flickering hand from Frank Sanchez. I don't know if the flickering means yes or no, but you are permitted to speak, and if you wish to, the floor is yours.
I unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. And it's very nice to meet all of you. I'm Frank Sanchez, and I'm speaking on behalf of the City Club of New York as well. I'm a board member and on the Preservation Committee. Along the way, I was also executive director of both the Landmass Commission and the Municipal Arts Society. So I'm urging Community Board 5 to support the landmark designation of the Roosevelt Hotel and the Puston Building. The historic significance of these buildings in terms of their individual architecture and their place as part of Terminal City has already been well established by the other testimony this evening. But their preservation is also important in terms of the best practices of sustainability, which hasn't been spoken about yet tonight. And this is an area in which New York City should be setting an example for the world, but sadly is not. Both the Roosevelt Hotel and the Puston Building are very well constructed, and they're structurally sound. They're in good condition. There's no reason for them not to continue to be used for their current purpose or adaptively reused for another. To demolish them for new construction is wasteful and unnecessary. The same issue is going to come up again very soon with the Hotel Pennsylvania at Penn Station. It's time for the Landmass Commission to take a stand and designate deserving buildings like these, even where there is intense development pressure. Community Board 5 should encourage the Commission to do so by supporting the designation of the Roosevelt Hotel and the Puston Building. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Any more questions or comments from members of the public? Okay, so seeing none. Oh, wait. So I would really appreciate, members of the public, that you notify me right here, right now, that you wish to speak. Let's not do this, sort of like tease out of, maybe, maybe not. I really need to get a sense of who wishes to speak. So I'm going to say it again. If you wish to speak, please indicate, use the raise hand function now, so that I know how many members of the public still wish to speak. We really need to manage the pace of this meeting, okay? So I see one more hand up. Carolyn Harris, you're going to be permitted to speak. If anyone wishes to speak, please indicate it now. And you are, Carolyn, you're permitted to speak. You can unmute yourself.
Thank you. I'm Caroline Harris. I'm an attorney with Goldman Harris. We represent RHC Operating LLC, the company that owns the land and building called that you're referring to as the Roosevelt Hotel. I believe Ms. Logisico referred to a submission that was made to the committee regarding this matter, but because it was not shared with you, I thought it would be important to read the letter written by ownership. So everybody on this committee would, and who's listening, would hear the letter. That's why we didn't choose to speak previously. We were wondering if you would be reading it to the committee. The letter says, Dear Chair Barbero, it's also written to the chair of the board, and Chair Law Gisico, Roosevelt Hotel Corporation Operating LLC, the RHC, owns the land and building located at 45 East 45th Street, which contains the Roosevelt Hotel. It has come to our attention that at its meeting to be held this evening, that the committee intends to consider whether the full community board should request LPC to evaluate the designation of the building as a landmark. This comes to us as a complete surprise, since the commission performed an extensive evaluation of buildings to be designated as landmarks in connection with the East Midtown rezoning in 2016. At that time, the building was not identified as one of the buildings that, quote, merited designation because they contribute to the rich historical and architectural context of the area, close quote. The building's history has not changed in the last 5 years. It still does not warrant designation. Accordingly, the RHC does not welcome the current effort to have its building designated a landmark, and in fact, we strongly oppose it. Aside from the building's lack of merit as a landmark, we would like to bring to your attention the current status of the hotel. Like many other businesses in New York City, the pandemic has affected the Roosevelt grievously on a personal level by its impact on our staff, and on a business level by our inability to operate our restaurant and bar, host guests, business meetings and events, or receive benefits from any of the various government relief programs. With great sadness, the hotel has been forced to close its doors. During these testing times, when the pandemic still has not ended and the future is uncertain, the city must help its businesses with all kinds of support. The RHC needs to be able to evaluate all business options without the restrictions attendant to designation. We urge you as a community organization within the city's official structure to support the possibility of revitalization of our business in your neighborhood without such additional constraints, and respectfully request that the community board not proceed further with its consideration of the matter of the designation of the building as a landmark. Thank you for your thoughtful consideration. Sincerely yours, Dr. Najib Sami, President of the Roosevelt Hotel Corporation Operating Company. Thank you.
Thank you. I will make sure one more time that we don't have any more members of the public who wish to speak. You are, of course, allowed to speak. You can notify by using the raise hand function if you wish to speak tonight. Okay, so seeing none, I would like to share an email that was received and shared with the rest of the committee, but for the record, I'm going to read it. It is from Peg Breen, who is the executive director of the Landmarks, the New York Landmark Conservancy. Leila, I am unable to testify at tonight's meeting, but do want you to know that the Landmarks Conservancy strongly supports designation of the Puston Building and the Roosevelt Hotel. They were on a list we fought for during the upzoning. I hope CB5 will support this as well. Many thanks for your consideration. So I think we have entered all the testimonies and letters that were received by the board. And that will conclude our public session. So we can now move to business session. During business session, only members of the committee are able to discuss the matter. So, you know, for a little bit of context on what it is that we are doing, basically there is a request for evaluation and the ask from those four groups is for CB5 to join those four groups in requesting that LPC does evaluate these buildings. So we need comments on that. And you can use the raise hand function. Barbara.
I'm completely in support of having these be for us to join the four groups and to have these be evaluated as landmarks. I mean, there's nothing that I've heard by the owners of the building that changed my mind one bit. I mean, frankly, and I really appreciate the lovely presentation that we had on the buildings, but as somebody who's lived in the district for a very long time, I've passed the Roosevelt Hotel with tremendous regret, seeing it empty, and have thought to myself that it was in danger of being replaced by something that would have far less character and a much greater bulk. And we've certainly seen that in other places in the district. And so, I'm actually feel very heartened by this movement by these groups to support preserving these buildings.
Thank you, Barbara. Richard, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Sure. I feel the same way, and certainly about the Roosevelt Hotel. Not quite as strongly about the Puston, but I think there are good prima facie cases to be made that these should be considered. Right? We're not opining, I don't believe, on they should be designated, although we may feel that way. But it's a lower bar, I believe, to say, yeah, there's a pretty good case that they should be designated. So they should be evaluated for designation. So even if we said, should they be designated, I'd say yes, but with some hesitancy. But given what we're opining on, I say yes with no hesitancy.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Suzanne, go ahead.
I was going to go back and say in support of Barbara and absolutely support preserving both the exteriors and without question the interior of the Roosevelt Hotel. I love the point of the best practices of sustainability on top of the cultural and historic significance of these buildings. I am not deterred in any way, shape, or form by the people who spoke from a legal standpoint or from an ownership standpoint. I recognize and have empathy for what's gone on with COVID, of course, and I understand that these are critical locations, and I see the value, I suppose, in terms of development through their lens, but that's not the lens that we're looking through here. And we have to honor what our city and our history is. And without doing that, as the poet spoke to, it is our job with so much loss that we hold on to as much as we can. And I 100% support this.
Thank you, Suzanne. Chuck.
Thank you, Layla. I'm kind of torn on this. I think not so much because of the merits, although I have questions there. I'm a little torn on the role of our community board and the role of our committee. As I looked at the history, it appears to me that there have only been at least posted on the website one time in the history of the committee that we have initiated a request for evaluation. Layla, I'm sure if I'm wrong, you'll correct me. And
well, I will correct you right here. We're not initiating the request.
Correct.
But, yeah.
Correct. And so it's a fairly unusual action for the committee to take and for the board to take. And in that regard, we have members of our district, individuals who own property in our district, who are asking us to do something. or not do something, as the case is. And I'm a little concerned that the advocates will do what advocates do, and that's their prerogative, and I certainly support them in it, but I'm not certain it's appropriate for the community board to weigh in. And so I'm not in a position I can support this.
Thank you, Chuck. So, just for the record, Community Board 5 has reviewed requests for evaluations from many different groups.
6 or 7 times. 6 or 7 times. That's what I saw on the website in the last 8 years.
The more recent is a building on 5th Avenue and 33rd Street, the Demarest building, and that was at the request of a number of neighborhood associations, preservation groups. And previous to that, it was actually a member of our committee at the time who actually acted on her own behalf, Renee Kinsella, who's no longer on the Landmarks Committee, but she was actually the one who initiated a request for evaluation of a hotel on 29th Street. The list goes on and on. It has been one of the steps that we take along with reviewing certificates of appropriateness. It is less frequent because obviously we have less requests for evaluations and we have requests for alterations to existing landmarks. But nonetheless, very much the bread and butter of the stuff we do. If you refer to the deck of the orientation, it is in the orientation that we give to new members. So very consistent with the work of the committee.
Respectfully, Layla, I simply looked at the list of resolutions on the website, and the number of times that the committee has chosen to engage in a discussion about requests for evaluation is very limited compared to its actions on looking at other things. And that's my point.
Thank you, Chuck. Maki.
Thank you so much, Layla. I very much appreciated the presentation by Francoise, and despite the severe declination of the hospitality industry through the pandemic, and also the unprecedented fiscal challenges that the owners must manage, I support the RFE for both the Puston Building related to the presenters reference to the Court of Honor, as well as the Roosevelt Hotel based on its national significance and namesake, as well as the significance to the past and future of New York City. In fact, I thought the hotel was already landmarked based on the marketing done while the hotel was still open. And as stated by one of the members of the public, I support this and wish for the LPC to be able to make the final determination regarding the status of both buildings.
Thank you, Maki. Peter.
I wholeheartedly support the RFE also. And likewise, I'm astonished that the Roosevelt has not already been designated, particularly thinking about how they've always promoted themselves. The Puston Building is such an important part of the fabric of Lower Park Avenue. And while, as the owner said, the buildings haven't changed in the last 5 years, the world has changed in the last 5 years. And we really need to treasure. We have to appreciate and treasure the fabric of the city that these two buildings are an important part of and are a diminishing part of. There are too few of them left.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Tony.
Thanks, Layla. I think on their own, the two buildings themselves would merit designation. The bigger picture is the fact that they are part of some of the very, very few remaining bones of the Terminal City vision. I can't think of any specific plan that more defined Manhattan's future than what the Terminal City vision was. This development, first of all, let's compare it to what happened with Penn Station and what the Penn Station builders did not do, have an overall vision for it. And look what's happened to that after all these decades of that area being developed and or lack of development. The cohesiveness of the area around Grand Central is all due to this one specific vision that came about. These kinds of buildings, and so many that are gone already, they led the way to their much taller neighbors to want to be here. The Chrysler Building and the Channon Building and the Lincoln Building, the Graybar Building, they all wanted to be here because Manhattan was now moving uptown, right? Manhattan, the city, the financial center, was now moving uptown. This vision said, this is where you need to be. And this is where all of our bigger, more famous neighbors came from. And we can't overlook the lesser members of that have unfortunately many disappeared, but the couple that are here, we do have to cherish. I am in favor of this. And I do want to remind owners that landmark buildings are an asset. People crave being in something with character. The Empire State Building has completely reinvented itself. Even the tiny, awkward shaped Flatiron Building is redefining itself because people want to be here. The MetLife Clock Tower, another one that people said, what are you going to do with that space? People want to be in these kinds of old historic buildings that have a story. Small tech that's taking over, small independent entrepreneurs that are taking over. These buildings are an asset. And no, they may not be a future 100+ story building, but the owner can make money. It's worth preserving. I am all for letting LPC hear the argument and devoting the attention that's required versus before, when of course they had a lot more going on and not enough time to devote, but devoting the attention that's required this time around to see if they see fit as well.
Thank you, Tony. I will add 2 points, one directly to Tony's comments. Big tech actually craves historic buildings. Google is in a historic building. Amazon is in a historic building. Facebook is in a historic building. And Apple just signed a lease in another historic building. This is where they want to be. So very clearly, there is a very, very robust market for those kinds of properties. And adaptive reuse is a wonderful thing. And we highly support and favor and promote alterations that would support adaptive reuse because we do appreciate that these buildings need to remain, what I call good citizens. They need to be functional. So you need to alter, you need to change a little bit, you need to, modify. And this is where LPC plays a great role. And, there's a layer of review and it works. We see it, that's why, the certificate of appropriateness is indeed the bulk of what we do. The second point that I want to make is that we are starting to see the effect of the East Midtown rezoning, taking shape. We're seeing, those new buildings. We have reviewed a number of them, whether at this committee or at the land use committee, and it is producing the effect that was meant to produce. So we're seeing these, transit improvements, and it is great. The East Midtown rezoning was meant to be, some sort of a finite endeavor, meaning that, we know how many new buildings we're going to get. We know what kind of improvements, transit and public realm we're going to get. The beauty is that every time a new building is being developed, there is a contribution to the public realm fund that then goes and makes improvements to the public realm. So these improvements could actually happen right in front of the Puston Building, for example, without the need for this particular building to be demolished. So public realm improvements are happening. They're built into the text. You don't need to cause more scar to then put your Band-Aid. The final point that I will make is that these buildings that are proposed for designation are actually very dense buildings. They're not small demure buildings that look like they belong in housing horses and, at the back of an alley. They are very robust, very dense. I don't know that actually the zoning today would permit those kinds of buildings, which really is besides the point. The point that I'm trying to make here is that the density is well used and well placed, and those are really like dense buildings that have a high capacity to be used for commercial or hotel use. I think that we have a good sense of where the committee is going with that. So I propose that someone makes a motion. Tony, you were assigned review, so do you want to make a motion?
Yeah, motion to approve the request for evaluation for the Puston and the Roosevelt Hotel.
All right, and we need a second. All right, so we are ready to take this to a vote. Buzz?
Yes.
Laura? I think Laura had to leave. John?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Suzanne?
Yes.
Maki?
Yes.
Let's follow up this meeting with several bullet points regarding the discussions that we've had and the issues that have been raised.
Whoever is not on mute, they put themselves on mute. Thank you. Richard?
Yes.
Mike?
Which is the last.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Sam?
Yes.
Chuck?
No.
Karen?
Yes.
Barbara?
Yes.
Oops, I'm sorry. I am a little bit scattered. Sorry about that. Peter?
Yes.
Tony?
Yes.
And Layla, I am a yes. All right, so the motion carries. Thank you very much to Françoise and all the civic organizations for reaching out to us. We will present that to the full board, and then it will be sent to LPC as well as our elected officials. And with all of that being said, the meeting is adjourned. I wish.
Layla, it's Vicky.
Yes,
Did you
Vicky.
call on Mary?
I'm so sorry. I did not call on Mary, and my apologies for that. Mary.
Yes.
Thank you so
you.
much. And
Thank
thank you, Mary, for being our new member of the committee. You're not a new member of the board, but recently assigned to the Landmarks Committee. And we greet you to the committee and thank you for your first vote. And you are a yes. Fantastic.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, Vicky, for noticing this omission on my end. So with all of that being said and done, the meeting is adjourned, and I wish you all a very good week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.